Welcome to Blender VT, and this is a Blender video tutorial for Blender's interface concept in Blender version 2.34. Blender's interface is intuitive, although it takes a little getting used to. No matter if you've used 3D software before or not, it's just really different. But after you become familiar with it, you'll learn to embrace it. As a Windows user and a newbie to Linux, which I do all of my modeling in, it took me some time to get used to. The middle mouse button is used constantly. The right mouse button does what you think the left will do. Things like that. But despite my original confusion, it is intuitive, and you'll be more productive because of this. And you'll get your modeling jobs done faster. So I guess you could say that Blender is built for speed in more ways than one. First off, Blender uses a lot of shortcuts. Most of these options can be accessed through buttons and menus, but if you want to be productive, learn the shortcuts. And because of this, as a general rule, work with your left hand on the home row of your keyboard and keep your right hand on the mouse. The most used keys are grouped around the home row, so you can access them easily. This is assuming that you use an English keyboard and use your mouse with your right hand. So what we see here is the default Blender scene. Blender uses windows to separate the screen. These are not the overlapping windows you're used to in most other programs. So as you can see here, we have a separator between the 3D viewport and the button window. And then we have a little separator right here, separating the main menu from the 3D viewport. Now you can expand or shrink the size of one of these windows by left-clicking and then dragging on one of the separators, and then you can change the size of that window. You can also split windows by right-clicking on the separator, and the way you know what side you're going to affect, if you click on it, when you move your mouse next to separator, you'll see it will change to that little up and down arrow thing, or right to left arrow. Now, if you're slightly down, then it will make a separator when you click split area for that area right there. And then you can left click to confirm or escape to cancel. But we're going to do left click to confirm, and then you see it's made a duplicate of these two windows. And let's say we want to make another split. Now my arrow is just a little bit to the right, so I'll make a separator on that right side. And now it's a little bit to the left, I'll make a separator on that side. Okay, now headers is another important thing that you need to understand. Each window has a header or a window toolbox, and this gives you a set of options. It also has a small menu that you can expand or collapse with that little arrow right there next to the first button. You can also turn off the header and change the location of the header by right-clicking on the header. Then you can select you either want the header to be on the top or on the bottom. Or we can say, we don't want a header at all, which would be really effective for these 3D viewports where we really won't want to have those options. And right-clicking works the same way, depending on how far you are to the left or right of the separator. When you right-click, defines what side of the header you turn on or off. And if you can't see the header, you can still turn it back on again by right-clicking on the same area that we would use to add a header and no header. Alright, while the header is visible, you can tell that the current window that you have is in focus because the header will highlight. It will be a lighter shade of gray. Like as you can see clearly on this toolbar right here, how it becomes a lot wider. That lets you know that the current window is in focus, and that whatever you do with the keyboard or the mouse while in this window will affect this window and this window only. Okay, knowing what window is in focus is really important when you start joining windows together. So let's say we want to take all these right here and join them. And to show you how this works, and I'm going to talk about this in a second, this right here is a window toolbox, and I'm just going to make these be different windows. Okay, now depending on which one is in focus, last before you click on Join Area, that lets you know what window type and stuff will carry over to the second window as well. So let's say these two top ones right here, we want this text editor to take the space of both of these. So I put my mouse in the text editor window first, and then I move into the middle. I'm gonna select Join Areas, and there you can see it. Both of those window spaces are taken up with the text editor. Now, let's say down here I want to have my 3D viewport. So I move my mouse into 3D viewport, move in, join areas, and now you can see it's taking the entire space. And that also works the same way when you want to vertically join them. I want the entire thing to be the 3D viewport, so I have my mouse in the 3D viewport view, move in, join areas, and there we go. It's taking up the entire space. Alright, now let's talk about the window type, that little button that I pulled up to change what type of window it was. All these windows right here, these are all the windows in Blender. Each one of these windows may contain different types and sets of information depending on what you're working on. These may include 3D models, animation, surface materials, Python scripts, a text editor, and so on. You can select the type for each of these windows by clicking its header's leftmost button with the left mouse button and just select one. Alright, now we're not going to worry about what all of these mean just yet. We're going to be going over these throughout the rest of the tutorials. But let's focus on the ones that we can see right now. This middle one is the 3D viewport. This provides a graphical view into the 3D scene you're currently working on. You can view your scene from any angle with a variety of options. Having several 3D viewports on the same screen can be useful if you want to watch your changes from different perspectives at the same time. Down here you have your buttons window. This contains most tools for editing objects, surfaces, lights, lamps, and much more. You'll need this window open constantly if you don't know all the hotkeys by heart. You might even want to have more than one of these windows opens, each with a different set of tools. Okay, and then up here we have the user preferences, or as we can see here is only the main menu. This window is usually hidden so that only the header, which is the main menu, is visible. If you want to see the user preferences, you just left click and drag, and oh, there we go. Then we have all kinds of cool options right here, which we won't get into just yet because you only are ever going to need to use these once, and a lot of these are kind of complicated. But just to let you know for right now that that is there. So if you want to see them for whatever reason, that's how you can access them. Alright, now let's go on and talk about contexts, panels, and buttons. The buttons in Blender are awesome. This is largely due to the fact that they are vector-based and drawn in OpenGL, which makes them elegant and zoomable. Buttons are grouped in the button window. It shows 6 main contexts shown here in that first row of buttons, and each one of these can be split up into subcontexts, which is the second row of buttons right here. Now let's go over the context and subcontext really quick. This first one is logic, then you have script, shading, and then as you can see when we clicked on shading, we now have 5 more subcontexts open, which is lamp, material, texture, radiosity, and world. And then here we have object, editing, and scene. And then this opens up 3 more subcontexts, which is rendering, animation, playback, and sound. Now, once a context is selected by the user, the subcontext is usually determined by Blender on the basis of the active object. For example, when we have shading on as our context, if we say, select a lamp, it will automatically select the lamp as a subcontext. If we click on a renderable object, shading, or which one is that? Oh, material. The material subcontext will pop up. And then if we select the camera, then the world subcontext will pop up. So Blender does that for your convenience. The most notable novelty in the interface is probably the presence of panels to logically group buttons. You'll notice that each panel is exactly the same size. They can be moved around, rearranged, and you can even have panels occupy the same space and be organized with tabs. So if you want to move one of these panels, you just left click and then drag it to where you want it to go. And you'll notice that as you do that, the panels will move out and then make way for your new panel. And then when you let go, it will just snap right into place. Now, if you want to move the view, just hold down the middle mouse button and then drag, and that will allow you to move through the buttons window. If you want to zoom in, just hold down Control and then use the mouse wheel. And if you want to do a glide zoom, just hold down Control and then hold down the middle mouse button and then move your cursor to zoom in and out. Now, if you want to rearrange these buttons in something that's anything but horizontal, just right click, and then your little panel will pop up where you can select between horizontal, vertical, and free. So if we click on vertical, you can see that they are now vertically aligned. If you set it to free, then they will not snap to each other, and you can even have them partially overlap if you want to. So this will give you a lot of freedom as far as how you want these panels to be arranged. Alright, now let's talk a little bit about tabs. Basically, if you see a panel that has a tab on it, that means there are two panels taking the same space. Now, if you want to take these panels and rip them out so they're not overlapping each other, just click on the tab and then drag it out and it'll rip the panel out. Now, if you want that panel to take the same space as another one, just click and drag, move it on top of an existing panel. You can see where that white outline will pop up. Then that will tell you that when you let go, it will now take the same spot and you can just select each one of those with the tab. Okay, lastly in the interface are several kinds of buttons which are disposed in the panel's tabs. Operation buttons, these are buttons that when you click on, they will perform some kind of operation. These can be identified by the brownish color in the default Blender color scheme. Toggle buttons, these come in various sizes and colors. The colors green, violet, and gray do not change functionality. They just help the eye to group the buttons and recognize the contents of the interface more quickly. Clicking on this type of button will simply change it from a state of on or off. Now, there are some buttons that actually have a third state. I'll give you an example of these. Okay, some buttons will actually have a third state. So right now this normal mapping button is currently off. We click on it once, it's now on. Then if we click on it again, it's still on, but now it's negative. So that's very helpful when you're mapping black and white textures to do things like, let's say, a normal map to control the reflectivity, things like that. Okay, and then you have what are called radio buttons. These are mutually exclusive buttons that in a given group only one can be on at a time, as in these, for example. Okay, and then you have something that are called number buttons. Number buttons can be identified by their captions, which contain a colon followed by a number. These buttons are handled in various ways. The first one, to increase the value, you can left-click on the right of the button where the little arrow is to increase the number, and then if you click on the other arrow, that will decrease the number. Now, if you want to change the number in a wider range, just click and then drag, and then you can see I can quickly move to a number that I want. Now, if I hold down Shift, you'll see that these numbers move slower. So that gives me a little bit more fine-tuned control over that button. Now, if you want to do it in a fixed increment, just left-click and drag, and if you hold down Control, that's when you can see now it only goes in increments of 1. If you just want to use the keyboard to enter in the number, you can do it that way as well. Just click on the number, and then you can use the keyboard to tell what number you want. Okay, now some of these number buttons actually contain a slider rather than these little arrows, like this specularosity, for example. If you just click and drag on the knob, you can change the value, and also the Shift and Control modifier applies here as well. And as you'll find, it actually applies to other aspects of the interface as far as moving objects and things like that. So we hold down Shift, and then you can see that I have to move the mouse a lot more to change the value. And then if I hold down Control, it will do it in a fixed increment. Okay, and then also you have what are called color buttons. These are a box that has a color inside of it, and that tells you what color you're currently using. So when you click on it, the color picker pops up. You can change the hue down here, and then here you can change the luminosity and the saturation. Now, when you find a color that you want, if you want to save it to this palette right here, just hold down Control and then left click, and then that currently selected color will be saved. And then you can click on these colors later to pick it. Now, let's say you have a color, and then you say, well, I really want to revert back to the previous color. All you have to do is just click on that previous color button, and then it'll save it. So now in order to keep this color, just press Escape or move your mouse outside of the box, and then there you have it. Okay, now you have the menu buttons. You can use the menu button to choose from dynamically created lists. Menu buttons are principally used to link data blocks to each other. Data blocks are structures like meshes, objects, materials, textures, and so on. By linking a material to an object, you assign it. The first button, this one right here, the one with the tiny little arrows pointing up and down, that opens a menu that lets you select the data block to link it. As you can see right now, we currently have an object selected, and that MA stands for material, and since there's only one material, that's the only one that we can select. Now, this next one right here is displaying the title, and if you left click on it, you can change the name of the material to whatever you want. Now, that X button right there, that will basically clear the link. It removes that link from this object to that material. Now, that car button right there, that will automatically create a name for that material. Materials usually start with the name just material, and if you make a duplicate of one, it'll be material.001. If you click on that, it will look at the material. It's like, oh, this is a red material. So I clicked on it, and it said red. So it has a bunch of names for colors that are stored in it. So it will create a pretty decent name for it. Okay, and then you have the F button. The F button specifies whether the data block should be saved in the file, even if it is unused or unlinked. Unlinked data is not lost until you quit Blender. This is a powerful undo feature. If you delete an object, the material assigned to it becomes unlinked, but it is still there. You just have to relink it to another object or press this F button. So when you do that, you can see that that will be saved no matter if it's linked to an object or not. Okay, now to the toolbox. After I put this back in its place. It's a little too small. There we go. Okay, by pressing spacebar in the 3D viewport, or by holding the left mouse button or the right mouse button with a still mouse for more than half a second, that opens the toolbox. So this contains 6 main contexts arranged on 2 lines, each of which opens menus and submenus. This allows you to do all kinds of cool stuff, and we'll talk about these later as we go on through the tutorials. Now, don't worry if you don't understand everything yet. This tutorial is more of a crash course to get you familiar with the interface and to let you know how to find everything. Most of what we talked about will come up again sooner or later when we actually use the things that we've pointed out. So you don't have to worry about memorizing everything right now. It's just a crash course. But one thing you really should understand fully through this tutorial is how to customize the interface that we talked about in the beginning. Now that you know how to do that, that doesn't mean that you have to customize the interface every single time you start modeling or doing animation or doing video editing. Yes, Blender does have a video editor. You can actually save this like a screen preset. So Blender calls them screens. Now watch what happens when you hold down Control and then use the left or right arrows on your keyboard. When I have the window selected. Oh, junk. I moved it. Okay. There you see we can select between previously defined customized screens that are great for whatever task we're going to be doing. Like this one, for example, is for animation. This one's for modeling, material, your sequence editor, which is Blender's own video editor. And you can also access them through here if you want to, but that's a slow way to do it. But when you use the control left and right, that will go through them alphabetically. Now let's say that we want to add one. So let's say here we have a modeling screen, and I want to create a screen for my text editor. So I say add new, and then you can see it created a new one, but it added the .001 at the end. That's a standard convention for Blender to make duplicates and have different names. So now we can change the name of it. So let's call it 5-text editor. Okay. Now you can see that I did 5 so that it will be at the end of the list when I use the control left and right because it's alphabetized. All right, so now let's do what we've learned with the 3D or the window type. We're going to set the window type to text editor. And you can see it only takes this part of the screen. We want to take up the entire screen. So I put my mouse in the window that I want to keep, move in, join areas, and there we go. And now we can have our own little thing, our own little text document. It's great. All right. And then as we move between the rest of them, we just added a new one, a new screen, and it didn't affect any of the other ones. It is also possible to have several scenes or 3D worlds within the same Blender file. So basically you can have more than one project in one Blender file. The scenes may use one another's objects or be completely separate from one another. You can select and create scenes with the CE menu button, and that will allow you to select between different scenes and also let you add a whole new one. So if we add a whole new one, when we create a new scene, we can choose between 4 options to control its contents. Okay, the first one is empty. This creates a completely empty scene. Link Objects creates the new scene with the same contents as a currently selected scene, so changes in one scene will also modify the other. Link Object Data, this creates the new scene based on the currently selected scene, with links to the same meshes, materials, and so on. This means that when you change the object's positions and related properties, but the modifications to the actual mesh, materials, and so on will also affect other scenes unless you manually make single user copies. So basically what this means is, let's say you have a scene with a sports car, and we have a scene of the sports car on the show floor, and then we have a separate scene using this link object data with the car on the open road. And then after a while we decide, oh, you know what, I really didn't want to make that car yellow. I want it to have red paint job, and then I also want to add a few little doodads, and maybe you want to add the fuzzy dice. And you make those changes in one scene, and then you switch to the other one, and those changes to that model have already been made. So that can really save you a lot of time if you're going to be using the exact same object in different scenes. Okay, and then you have full copy, and that makes a fully independent scene with copies of the currently selected scene's contents. So if you change an object in one scene, it won't affect the other. Okay, that about does it for the interface. It's a lot to take in all at once, but it will come naturally as you watch the rest of the tutorials and play around with Blender on your own.